Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We are here with two of our attorneys from Sodoma Law. My name is Allison Frazier. I'm the Communications Director at Sodoma Law, and I will be serving as our host and moderator for today. We have family law attorneys David Simmons and Theresa Viera with us to answer some questions about the modification of financial support during COVID-19. Before we get started, there's a few things to know. We will try to answer questions as we receive them, and we will also reserve a few minutes at the end of the webinar to answer questions as well. Attendees, please note that you can submit your question anonymously if you prefer to do so. Please remember to use the Q&A section and not the chat function. The information in this webinar is based on North Carolina law. The insights given today are for educational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. This webinar does not, nor is it intended to, create an attorney-client relationship. Every situation is unique, and you should consult with an attorney for advice on your specific situation. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started and jump into this. David, why don't you give us a brief overview of the types of financial support that might be impacted at this time?
Sure. So during this time, the two types of supports that we're thinking about being impacted are child support and spousal support. And when we think about child support, we're talking about usually money that is going from the payor parent to the other child's parent for the care and maintenance of the child. Certainly, depending on your order or your agreement, there may be other provisions in your child support obligation relating to maintaining health insurance for your child. There could be other things such as a split of extracurricular expenses, and certainly maybe things like private school tuition costs. When we talk about spousal support, typically what we're thinking about is money that is paid from one spouse to the other spouse to kind of try to maintain that same standard of living that the spouse who doesn't have as much income was enjoying during the marriage.
Muted. Here's a question that we get a lot, Theresa, now that we've broken it down and know what the difference is between the different types of support. The question we get is, how does a change in my financial circumstance affect my legal rights when it comes to support? Do you want to tackle that for us, Theresa?
Sure, my pleasure. Generally, when spousal support or child support is initially determined, it's based on the income and financial circumstance of the parties at that date. Now that this pandemic has occurred, a lot of individuals' incomes, job situations, and financial circumstances are changing. Therefore, you may have a claim to modify that child support or spousal support claim. And that should be discussed with your attorney after you've reviewed your financial circumstance to assess your financial ability.
Great, thanks. Now that we've gotten those basics out of the way, let's move on to the specific kinds of support and how they might be impacted. We're going to start with child support today. Our first question is, I owe child support, but I've just lost my job due to the pandemic. What do I do? Theresa, I'm going to kick this back to you to answer.
Thanks, Alex. A loss of your job or significant reduction of income alone does not automatically create a claim to modify your spousal support or child support obligation. In fact, a lot of people think that if their income reduces, then their child support obligation is automatically modified, and that is not the case. Rather, if you lack any income or financial resources to meet your child support obligation, then after reviewing your own financial circumstance, you want to discuss the matter with your attorney. If the child support obligation is due to a court order, meaning an obligation imposed upon you by the court, then you may be able to file a motion to modify. And that motion to modify is basically a request to a judge stating, Your Honor, my financial circumstances have changed significantly, and I simply cannot afford this high amount of child support. In contrast, if the child support obligation is due to a signed and notarized agreement, then you may be able to negotiate an obligation directly with the opposing side. Through this process, though, you and your attorney will want to discuss the different tools available to you, and that may include bringing the attention of your job loss to the attention of the opposing side.
Correct. Okay. So with that said, I'm sure that some people are wondering why filing a motion to modify child support is so important. David, can you explain a little bit more about why that is?
Sure. I'd say there's a couple of different reasons. Number one, and this will be for folks whose child support obligation is established under a court order. If your child support is established under a court order, we've got a law in North Carolina that talks about vesting of child support. And essentially what that law says is once your child support payment becomes due, it vests. That means the person who is owed that child support becomes entitled to it. As such, let's give an example. Say on Friday, March the 13th, you lost your job, like a lot of people did in this country. And say your child support obligation is $600 on the first of each month. Well, on April 1st of 2020, your $600 payment became due. Let's say you couldn't pay it. On that date and time, that payment became vested, meaning the person you were supposed to pay it to became entitled to that payment. And the same thing will happen on May 1st and each subsequent month. Now, if you filed a motion to modify your child support, those payments are still due. So each first of the month, those payments are still due. However, when you have a hearing on your motion to modify, the judge can look back and retroactively modify the amount of payment to a different amount and potentially lower your child support, which is critical right now. Everybody's concerned with the pandemic about bills mounting up and how are we going to handle these bills. Well, that child support obligation is another debt that could be just adding up and accruing. So at least if you file your motion to modify, if you do have a court order, you can kind of mitigate that circumstance.
Right. So with that being said, you mentioned the court order. I know that we have some people out there whose child support may be dictated by a separation agreement, a parenting agreement, or some other type of agreement besides a court order. David, can you tell us how the modification process differs in those cases?
Sure. So if your child support arrangement is not pursuant to a court order, and instead is contractual, you need to have some communication with the person, your child's other parent, because in North Carolina, you can't just file a motion to modify a contractual agreement if both sides don't agree to the modification. So you need to have that communication, have a dialogue. Certainly, I can understand if the communication has not been great in the past. But we're certainly living in unprecedented times. I am hopeful that the person that you are speaking with can come up with some creative approaches with you about how to handle this. Certainly, if you run into a wall and your child's parent is not willing to modify the agreement and doesn't want to discuss any alternative arrangement, then the next step for you is to file an actual child support action. And what you should know is when you file that child support action, when you go into court, you have to overcome a presumption. And the presumption is that the child support that you previously agreed to with your child's parent was the right amount of support for your child. And it's a burden that you're going to have to overcome. And I imagine that a lot of folks are going to have to, who have agreements of child support and can't come to an agreement about a new amount. I imagine that a lot of them are going to be faced with this presumption and how to overcome it.
Great. So there are options out there, and it sounds like at this point, or it sounds like, getting your attorney involved early on and having them walk with you every step of the way is really the key, especially when it comes to the agreement portion where you're looking at possibly negotiating or whatever it might be. So that That's important. So we've talked a lot about what to do if you're the one paying child support today. Let's switch it up and talk about what if you're owed. Can the two of you discuss what options someone has if they're owed support? Theresa, we'll start with you.
Sure. If you're owed support, we tend to think that the only way of meeting a child support obligation is via a monthly monetary payment. However, there are other forms of relief. For example, a court may provide relief via ordering that a sum in an investment account or retirement account be distributed to the person who is owed the child support. In rare circumstances, the court could even distribute other forms of property, such as a vehicle or real property, or such that real property be sold or other property be sold to fulfill the child support obligation. Now, if the child support is actually through what we call in North Carolina the Title IV courts, there is the ability of the court to even get any tax refunds that would go to the payor to be rerouted to the person who is owed the child support amount. That's to ensure that at the end of the day, the person who is receiving those funds for the benefit of the children is able to have some type of financial resource to either sell or figure out a way to get money out of to then provide for the needs of the children. This is a very important time, though, to involve your attorney on the different tactics, as well as attempting to talk to the other side to see if there's a creative way to fulfill the obligation along the way.
Sure, and if I could just piggyback on that, something that Theresa said, coming up with alternative arrangements. I just think that that's a great idea. And one thing that comes to mind right now is the CARES Act, and how through the CARES Act you can take distributions out of your retirement accounts without the penalty right now. And certainly, you know, before you do anything like this, you need to be talking to a financial planner. You need to be talking to your attorney. And certainly, I would echo what Allie said at the beginning of this. This is not, you know, legal advice. This is for educational purposes, but it is an option that's out there, and certainly one that through, you know, legal strategy and financial planning, it might be something that is appealing to you right now. Other things that we're probably going to see, refinancing on your homes. A lot of that is occurring right now. Certainly for folks who have lost their employment, they may be foreclosed from that option right now. However, we are hoping that, you know, this situation improves, and certainly there may be some other options to explore. But I think Theresa just made a great point about alternative arrangements for, you know, kind of coming up with different ways to meet those obligations.
Yeah, well, that's great to know. And, you know, that's what our main goal today is to let people know that they have options. And it's good to know what those options are. And once again, not to repeat it several times today, but asking your attorney, working with your attorney, all of those, they know all of the ins and outs of this and can help you decide what's best. Now, that was a lot of information to cover. I appreciate you both going through that. Let's move forward to spousal support and away from child support. So when it comes to spousal support, as discussed earlier, it provides for a variety of different things. Theresa, if someone pays spousal support and they've lost their job, what can they do?
Well, let me first go into a little bit of details of what spousal support entails. Spousal support, the purpose thereof, is to, as David noted earlier, help a dependent spouse who is in a financial need to maintain a certain standard of living. Now, that standard of living is being dramatically affected all the way around because of the recent pandemic. And if someone is paying spousal support, you want to look at what you're paying for. Generally, a lot of people think of spousal support as alimony or just a payment from one person to the other, but it could also involve payments toward a mortgage, a car payment, or any other needs that we all fulfill in daily life. Therefore, you want to think about, okay, well, if I can only afford a certain amount, where should that amount go? Of course, we want to make sure everyone has a place to live. We want to make sure everyone involved has food to eat, has clothing on their bodies, maybe a means of transportation should they still be required to go to and from work. And so these are the different considerations you want to take into account when you're the payor of spousal support and what that money is being used for. If you've lost your job or if your income has been substantially reduced, then you want, similar to a child support order, you want to talk with your attorney about a motion to modify. Because if you're not able to meet your financial needs, then you likely can't meet the financial needs of the opposing side either. In a similar fashion, if spousal support is through a court order, you may have the options to file a motion to modify, and you may want to discuss the matter with the opposing side sooner rather than later at the direction of your counsel. And if, similar to the motion to modify child support, if you have that claim, you're going to want to file it sooner rather than later, because as David pointed out with child support, it will continue to add up and continue to toll.
Okay, good to know. David, our next question asks, I filed a motion to modify spousal support, but what do I do in the meantime?
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple of different things that you should be doing. Number one, you need to remember that your spousal support obligation is just that. It's an obligation. So if you are able to pay, you need to keep paying, because if you don't, you run the risk of that balance just continuing to grow on you. So if you are capable of paying, even though you filed that motion to modify, you should keep paying. And you should know that when you go to court, if your obligation is modified, that the judge can give you a credit for the overpayments that you made. So certainly, that's something that you should keep in mind. I would also say after you file that motion to modify, you should keep records of your financial picture, what it looks like. What do you have coming in? What do you have going out? What your entire portfolio looks like. And certainly you should work with your attorney, your financial planner, if you have one, to try to, get a very accurate picture of how things look for you. And I would try to keep that picture as accurate as I could month to month to month until you get into court. The next thing I would say is communication again. Communication is key. And certainly if you're paying spousal support to your ex every month and you lost your job, you should tell your ex, hey, I've lost my job, or I've been furloughed, or I haven't lost my job, but the structure of how I'm being paid is different. For instance, there are spousal support obligations out there that say, you're going to pay this amount, and then you've got bonus compensation coming into play, and then your spouse is going to get a percentage of that. Well, what we're seeing is, not everybody is getting laid off, but perhaps their bonus compensation is changing. So their salary may be decreased. You may see a 20% pay cut in your salary, and then your bonus obligation is different. So some people may be thinking now, okay, well, I haven't lost my job. Why do I need to file a motion to modify? Well, you may haven't lost your job, but the way that you're being paid might have changed. And if it's changed, then it's certainly something for you to consider and have that conversation with your attorney before you say, maybe this isn't the way to go. But certainly, I would say again, keep paying if you can pay, keep records, and communicate with your ex about your circumstances.
Okay, so it sounds like from our conversation today, regardless of the type of support you might be paying or receiving, our big three takeaways here are open communication, keeping records, keeping very detailed records of everything, and also talking with your attorney early on so that y'all can decide what the best next steps are so that you can cope with your current situation and also be prepared for the future. With that said, thank you both for your time today. We are going to open up the floor for a Q&A at this point. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put those in. And it actually looks like I have a question right here. This question says, okay, in reference to modifying, if I continue to pay my support and then they modify it, do I get that money back if I overpaid?
Sure, I'll take that one. So it's not necessarily that you'll get any overpayment back, but generally what happens is a court will first determine when the new obligation begins. Our argument would be that the new obligation begins back to the date that you filed it. And if it does, and let's say you've overpaid by $100 a month, then you'll receive a credit for that $100 a month in your future child support or spousal support obligation. There'll be a lot of math going on, but essentially you'll get the credit for it back.
Great. Okay. It looks like that's all we're going to have time for today. For the Q&A portion, I will say if there's anybody out there that didn't get to ask their question or has a question that they would like to contact us about offline versus having answered live, you can definitely do that. You can always follow up with us at attorney@sodomalaw.com or also our phone 704-442-0000. We really appreciate you all joining us today. We hope the information that we shared with you was helpful. David, Theresa, again, thank you for your time today. I would like everybody to know that Sodoma Law offices are operating with normal business hours during the pandemic, and we were equipped to offer virtual support to new and existing clients. If you have questions, know that you do not have to cope with any of this alone. An experienced attorney can help you. Whether it's us or somebody who you're currently working with, it's important to do that. Please just know you don't have to do this alone. And until we see you all again next time, stay safe and remember to wash those hands, everyone.